All right, so this Knife Thoughts video is going to be a review of this knife, the Sencut Acumen. And first of all, I wanted to make sure to mention that this knife was sent to me by Sencut for review. I didn't purchase it, but as always, I will definitely give you my full, honest thoughts on the knife. So make sure you stick around till the end when I will mention some of the things that I think could be improved on this knife. But who is Sencut? So I think a lot of people might not be familiar with Sencut because they're a relatively new entrant to the knife market. And what Sencut is actually another brand made by the same manufacturer as WE knives, like this Banter, and Civivi knives, like this Elementum. Two very, very well thought of EDC knives. So Sencut is another brand being made by this same manufacturer, and if you're interested in what the quality of this Sencut is, I think the best place to look is other knives made by the same manufacturer. So a lot of people are familiar with Civivi knives and WE knives, and Sencut knives, I've had several of them so far. They seem to be really, really on par with those other brands, in particular Civivi. And actually, it brings up a saying in traditional knives. If you watch my channel, you know that I really appreciate traditional knives. And that saying is, don't read the tang, read the knife. So what does that mean? Well, if you look at a traditional knife, they tend to have the manufacturer, or more realistically, the brand stamped on the tang. So you can see here, this one says Titty Ute Cutlery, made in USA. On the other side, you see it says GEC CAR, which means Great Eastern Cutlery manufactured it, and it has carbon steel. But here's another knife, and this one, if we open it up, says Northwoods, and on the other side just says USA. So an example of that saying is, if you look at the tang of this knife, you would say, oh, it's made by Northwoods. You wouldn't know that it's made by the same manufacturer as this knife. But then when you look at how it's actually made, like some hallmarks like the pins and how the bolsters are done and things like that, you can see that these knives probably were, and we know because it's put out there publicly, that they're made by the same manufacturer. And the same kind of thing can be said for Sencut knives. They have a lot of the same hallmarks of Civivi knives. So for example, if you look at the liners of this Sencut, they're rounded. They're not flat against the scales, like on some knives, like maybe well, this is actually not a great example. These are beveled, but not rounded. So this is a Kaiser, which has beveled edges. But then something like a Rough Rider, another Chinese-made brand, where they're flat and kind of flush with the scales. On the Sencut, the liners are rounded. And then things like the machining along the edges of the G10 handle, even the roughness of the G10, the fact that it has cage ball bearing pivots, and the tuning of the detent, all kinds of things like that, as well as the clip, the style of clip, really is reminiscent of Civivi knives. So if you're familiar with the quality of Civivi knives, which is very high quality for the price, then you can pretty much expect that with a Sencut. These are well-made knives. They are pretty refined for the price, I would say, with things like the beveling along the G10 handles, the swedging and beveling on the blade, which you can see here, as well as in the cutout to open the knife, nice jimping, and all kinds of things like that, as well as the materials. So this knife is in G10 handles, and then if you can see it on the tang here, 9CR18 MOV steel, which is a steel that Civivi uses on a lot of their knives. So it has a lot of those qualities that Civivi knives have if you're more familiar with Civivi. And it is a high quality manufacturing on this knife. It's well made. It came pretty much perfectly centered. As you can see, I haven't adjusted this knife. This is how it came other than oiling it. And very smooth, drop closed, as you can see, very easy to flip. And no blade play, even when unlocked here, so just unlocked past the detent. No side to side, and it locks up very solid forward and back. So it's a well-made knife. It also didn't come with any kind of edge damage. It came with a pretty sharp edge and doesn't have blade wrap or anything like that. So well made, and like I say, I think not as many people are familiar with Sencut, but if you're familiar with Civivi, you can expect the same type of quality here. Now, as for the design of this knife, that's really what drew me to it. So it's an interesting knife because it's relatively small. I'll show you a couple comparisons again to some other EDC size knives. Here again is the Wee Banter and the Civivi Elementum. So you can see that the Acumen is pretty much the same length, maybe a little bit longer than these two other knives, but not a whole lot. And then bringing something in like a Spyderco Native 5, a very classic EDC knife. You can see that it's similar in size to the Sencut. In fact, the Sencut actually has a little bit more blade length, or edge length, I should say, on it, because it doesn't have the choil. And then something like a Benchmade Griptilian. Now, this is the full-size version of the Griptilian, so it's going to be a little bigger. The mini Griptilian would be closer in length. But you can see that the Acumen is very much an EDC-sized knife. So it's relatively small, but at the same time, it's relatively tall. And I do appreciate that in a knife where it has a nice tall blade. It makes it look more sturdy and also allows for a nice high grind. Speaking of the grind, I use this knife a lot, and it is really well ground. It's not a surprise because Civivi and we do so well with their grinds, but sometimes budget knives aren't ground quite as thin as their higher end counterparts, even by the same manufacturer, but that's not the case here. If you can see, it comes to a nice thin edge. Now, I don't do, behind the edge thickness measurements and things like that, but I can tell you from use that it cuts very well, and it's not a surprise being that it is ground thinly. It has such a tall blade, can have a high grind, and Civivi and we and whatever the manufacturer is that makes all these knives tends to do a good job with their grinds. So I do like that for not just the look of the knife, but the fact that it gives some practicality in the grind also. Now, as for the handle, it's a good kind of classic looking handle with the really strong finger guard, forward finger guard here, and then another scallop here for the kind of main grip area. One thing I was a little concerned about getting this knife was that it would be too small for my hand. I have pretty wide hands, and a lot of knives are too short in my hand, particularly if they have an upturn towards the butt like this. Now, it actually fits better than I expected, and that's because it doesn't land so that my pinky is on that upturn. When I hold it like this in kind of a hammer style grip, my pinky falls off of the edge pretty well there. So in this pinch style, or even this type of pinch style, it's pretty comfortable. I didn't really have any issues with the ergonomics of this knife. And to be honest, with it being smaller and having that upturn, I expected it. So I was pleasantly surprised by that. Now, I also, like I said, I use this knife a lot, so I sharpened it. It's easy to sharpen. That 9CR18 MOV, it's not a super steel, but it's a fine steel, especially for a knife in this price range. Moving on to some of the things that I think could be a little better. So I am never really a huge fan of slot type opening holes on knives. Now, there's a reason why they do this. Spyderco has a pretty tight grasp on the pure round hole opening. So unfortunately, other companies can't really use that. But it works pretty well. It's just not as secure feeling as an actual hole, a circular hole would be. I just find that my finger, my thumb can kind of slip on it. That said, I actually find that it's really good for a middle finger flick. I'm just not a huge user of the middle finger flick, although on this knife, I found myself using it more than I do on other knives with opening holes. So I do think that it would open a little easier and more securely with a round hole, but it's not a huge deal, especially because, again, you have the flipper, and it does flip very nicely. I never had, that I can recall, a single failure to flip it the whole way open with the flipper. Another thing here is that I didn't keep the box, so I can't actually show it to you, but this knife is actually in about the same price range as a lot of Civivis. It's about $42, $45, something like that, depending on, sales and taxes and whatnot. But it's about, we'll say, $43. So there are definitely Civivis in that price range. They maybe are moving a little higher somewhat, but there are definitely Civivis in that price range. And Civivis tend to come with a nice zipper pouch. Now, once you've had a lot of Civivis, it's something where you don't really need a whole lot more of those zipper pouches, but it is a nice touch. And these Sencut knives so far have come with just kind of a very typical cardboard tan box. Not really a practical issue, but just something where if these are going to be pretty much the same price as Civivis and have the same materials and the same construction, why don't they come with that zipper pouch? But interestingly, just before making this video, I saw Sencut posted on Instagram that they do have zipper pouches, and I don't know when those will be implemented, but it seems like at some point they will be implementing zipper pouches in their packaging like Civivi and Wii. So that's an interesting thing. Another nice thing about this knife is that it is very light for the size. It feels light in the hand. It's easy to carry for the tallness, and part of that is because it's very milled out on the inside, and it also comes in some cool colors. So I got this purple because honestly I have a flashlight that's purple that I wanted to pair with this, but they also come in several different other options that are, it's nice to have those other options. But as far as I can tell, it doesn't come in wood, and I do really appreciate that Civivi and Sencut use wood. In particular, I have this Sencut Snap, which is one of, if not my favorite knife of 2021 that I got, and I really like that you're able to get a modern knife with a wood handle for such a budget-friendly price. So I do wish that they would offer the Acumen with the wood handle, but as of my last checking, they didn't. Now, overall, I think that this is a really nice little knife. Like I said, if you're familiar with Civivi, you can pretty much expect that type of quality from a Sencut knife. And I think you get a good value, even without the zipper pouch, at, again, about $43. Like I said, you can only get these on Amazon and through Sencut's site. Now, if you'd like to support the channel, you can buy it through the link in the description, which will be an Amazon affiliate link. It doesn't cost any more to you, but I might get a couple cents or something like that if you buy one using that link. And I do appreciate Sencut sending this knife to me because I like Sencut knives. I've liked all of the ones that I've had. And in fact, I gave one of them to my brother because he liked the design of it so much. So it's really fun to be able to get to check these out, and I appreciate the opportunity for Sencut sending this along to me. So if you've enjoyed this video, make sure you give it a thumbs up. You can also subscribe by clicking the bell and select all so that you actually get notified when I post new videos. Also, check out my other social media. I'm on Instagram and Facebook at Knife Thoughts, and my website, knifethoughts.com, where I post articles on knives like this and knife-related topics. And last but not least, as always, don't forget to go out and do good.